So good afternoon, everyone. I know that it's after lunch, and this is the last session before our, famous cruise. So, so we'd like to get it going. So my name is SM Hassan. I am a senior engineer and project leader at GRC. I work in the Brent Brunel's Edge group. So this is a little bit different session for the Edge Control Symposium because we will be focusing on the wearable. As you know, the wearable is getting a lot of attention, at least during the last 5 to 7 years in the consumer world because of the Fitbit, Apple Watch, and a lot of different types of availability of the wearable. But in today's session, we'll be talking from the industrial safety perspective because that's the one other area wearable is actually changing our life a lot. So that's the focus. We have a great speaker also today from different companies. They will give you a different perspective. But I would like to give you just a brief overview. If you think about the overall safety and productivity perspective, there is a huge market there right now that using the wearable, we can actually solve some of the issue industries are facing. Some of the number you can see from the left side that like almost 2.3 million fatalities happen every year throughout the world due to the workplace type of injuries. And the number is even not small just for the US, right? We have some data that just almost 5,000 fatalities periodically happen just in the US. And each death, just the direct cost is 3 to 7 million. We are not talking about indirect cost here, like related to productivity and other. So it's a huge, cost and emotional loss associated with the safety. Just if we can, prevent just one death, that will actually give the ROI for like using this kind of wearable devices in the industry. And the other thing is, the whole demography is changing, right? There are some statistics out there that by 2026, 37% of people who are aged between 65 to 69 years, they will still be in the workforce. So we need to make sure that we augment their physical capability with some technologies, wearable technologies, that they can be productive, right? They can be still productive. And the market is growing rapidly. I mean, there are some numbers there that, almost different venture capitalists, they funded since 2014, almost $6 billion in lots of startups. So that's why we think that this is a good area to focus on because if you think the overall system, right, wearable is a kind of the ecosystem. So it contains the sensors, it contains the connectivity, it also has your software platform and analytics. So there are a lot of similarity between all the discussion we are having from the morning, right? Some of our cloud infrastructure, our edge infrastructure. So in order to have a good wearable system, we need to have innovation throughout the whole chain. Like, for example, say sensor, right? Since we are talking about using those sensors for saving human life, they need to be very reliable. It cannot be just monitoring something. It needs to have a very high response time. So your sensor needs to be absolutely robust. And then the connectivity, right? Because say for example, some of the application like for underground mining, or say remote oil and gas field, many times the regular commercial wireless solution or connectivity solution like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, they don't work. So we need some innovation to get a robust connectivity there too. And then the platform. I think everybody in this conference, you guys are pretty know about the importance of having a platform, that security perspective from scalability perspective. Not only for the public cloud, also the private cloud, that we can support different types of customers. But I think we think the most important one is the analytics, right? Because there are lots of companies out there right now, they have their own sensor specific to a specific, use. But let's say they have their own connectivity, own cloud platform. So if you use like 5 different type of sensor from 5 companies, then you are ended up using 5 different platforms, right? So that's why we were thinking that how can we combine everything, maybe under one open architecture type of wearable system that the customer or user can kind of pick and choose, right? They do not need to tie with a particular vendor or particular software infrastructure. So we'll hear more from our panel. Now, just to give you quickly what GRC can offer, because in our global research, we are actually have innovation, all those different segments. We have a kiosk in the outside, so feel free to stop by there so that we can talk more details. But just to give you a very high level that we are working on developing different sensor over the years, almost like 10, 20 years, through our program with different defense, military, and other people. And then the connectivity, because even for our GE's industrial, our own need, we develop a lot of different wireless solution, proprietary wireless. Like there is a technology we developed. It's a Bluetooth-like short-range communication, but it is almost 10 times less power hungry and 9 times more reliable. And so some of our business are actually using it in their product. And then some of the solution we have in the platform and analytics. So we can, if you stop by our kiosk, then we can talk more detail. Now, just to give you a brief high-level overview, who we have from the speaker perspective. So Sam Murley, he is the EHS Digital Acceleration Leader at GE. So Sam is actually evaluating like hundreds of different wearable devices for GE's internal application, for all the different business for GE, all the way from different sensing, ergonomics, and system perspective. So Sam can provide a very good overview of what's happening inside GE. And then we have Steve Labunsky. He's an R&D specialist from Con Edison. As you know, the Con Edison is one of the largest utility company in Newark. So he's also doing the same thing. He's also evaluating like different types of wearable and different technologies for increasing the safety of utility worker inside the Con Edison. And then we have a Chris Caulfield. He's a Chief Revenue Officer at DACRI. So DACRI's focus is a little bit different. I mean, they have some augmented reality solutions that they are focusing on to increase the productivity and efficiency of worker. So Chief will talk about that. And then Chuck Millett. Chuck is a global account manager in analog devices. So as you know, the analog device is a cheap manufacturer, but there are many sensors and devices. They use actually analog devices cheap for sensing environmental parameters, biological parameters, and they are also developing lots of wireless solutions and wireless related chip too. So Chuck will give a little bit overview. So now, so the format is that, so each of the speakers, they will talk around 12, 15 minutes. And then at the end of their talk, we can have a live Q&A. So you can ask questions, and then we can have we'd like to have a good discussion. So I would like to maybe invite Sam to provide some overview.
Yeah.
There you go.
While he's bringing the slides up here, I think a great kind of Hassan teed it up in a perfect way. We were talking here amongst ourselves how it's a pretty interesting time in this space and industry. A lot of things are moving from externally outside of GE, internally within GE, even in public and private sectors in different joint initiatives. So it's exciting to be here with these folks here, talk a little bit about what we're doing internally within GE and how we're driving really digital transformation in the environment, health, and safety function across the globe. So I manage the emerging technology portfolio for EH&S at the company. And really what that means is building a pilot to deployment process, not so much a rigid process, but a very flexible, kind of based on a lean startup approach process. Really, it's to give the businesses, partner with the businesses within GE, giving them the ability to try out new technology in the hopes that we can measure successful impacts. So that's my mission, that's my goal within the digital 1EHS team in corporate. So, quick agenda. I want to do a macro kind of to micro perspective. So both a practitioner's approach. Hopefully there are things that folks in the audience could take away from our lessons learned, which we'll get to. I'm going to start with our 5-year roadmap, which I think is a great way to put some context around what we're going to talk about. Show a high-level summary of how we go from ideation and tracking new technology into a pilot scenario all the way out into deployment, and what some of those checks and balances look like, and what are the things we're doing throughout that process itself. And then talk about kind of lessons learned. So following up on what Hassan was talking about a few minutes ago, what are those connected worker principles that we're finding extremely important from multiple stakeholders that get involved with using this technology? Hit on some do's and don'ts, and then I think leave maybe some more thought-provoking questions out there for us to think on. So our 5-year roadmap, we're in year 3. You can see the 2018 indicator, just about to finish and eclipse year 3. This really started a little more than 3 years ago, actually, and at that time, all the way out on the left of the slide, we were very, very much focused on getting our digital and data foundation right. So we didn't want to move too fast, knowing we were going to get to evaluating and deploying wearable technology. So we wanted to ensure that, okay, was our digital strategy, was it going to be extensible enough when these new technologies and platforms came along? And that's the focus on the left. So we locked in with a company called GenSuite, and that's the platform that GE uses across the globe to manage risks, EHS risks more broadly, right? So think of that as a system of record. And then we wanted to also give some flexibility within the businesses to do ad hoc reporting, pull out trends and analytics that we could not get from GenSuite. So we started with that, but I think we're at a pretty exciting time right now in year 3. So if you could imagine, there's a mirroring version of this slide where we have prioritized our highly hazardous and high volume risk categories and the things that continue to challenge us as a company, from keeping our workers safe, protecting the environment. And then this is that mirroring version of the technology that we're seeing an immense impact when in place. So we started with smart eyewear and have seen some pretty impactful successes there. But I think as we look at it in these 6 technology categories in the middle, it's kind of the pieces of the pie, right? And I think where we've got workers up on a wind turbine, for example, or needing some immediate support out on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, you can start to imagine that more than just one wearable device could be deployed. So smart eyewear, definitely a lot of work going on there. But we also focused on our lone workers, right? And deploying technology that could detect hazards that they get exposed to. Both, it could be somewhat known and unknown, such as high voltage, such as toxic gas. So we wanted to focus on that a little bit. But then we started to think about, okay, those are high hazard use cases. Smart eyewear is kind of an operational excellence initiative. What about those high volume things? And we started to think about ergo. So right now we have 2 areas of focus specifically with ergonomic wearables: exoskeletons and ergonomic sensors. Using exoskeletons as an intervention mechanism when coaching or changing up the assembly line fails, really a last line of defense to try and protect that worker from having a future injury. And then the sensors themselves, when deployed on body, can provide some very, very interesting future predictive analytics, again, to try and prevent folks who are at the highest risk of having a future back injury. So those are some of the trends there. You can see on the bottom, really moving from platforms to smart ecosystems, and I think it goes hand in hand, Hassan, with the great work going on at the GRC. And you could really kind of pull out EHS and put in quality or productivity. I think the story's all the same. But for us, we envision in the not so distant future, people wearing things on body, off body, having smart cameras deployed to detect when someone's getting too close to a crane that's lifting a heavy load that could injure them. And we're starting to think through some of those things. So I don't think this is necessarily a, go to year 3 and we're not, we're turning things off from year 1, or go to year 5 and we're turning things off from year 3. I think the approach is more, these are now the new tools in the tool set, right? And things that workers and operators and maintenance folks take with them today, I think will get augmented by some of these technologies in the very near future. So some good stuff here. So this is actually how we do it. And we'll get to some pilot numbers and kind of deployment statistics here toward the end. But we have a 3-stage approach, right? We want to start with the problem, but build the hypothesis. What are we trying to solve? What do we think something like a voltage sensing band can do when deployed? And we start to create those key metrics or those KPIs in partnership with the business that needs that type of risk management solution, right? And then at the top of the curve, this goes back to the previous slide. One thing we do when we know we have a problem, we know we have engagement from a site, is we want to validate it if we can with some type of metrics. So can we go to our historical injury metrics and really validate this is a critical problem? Or can we look to leading indicators and say, okay, maybe this area of the site hasn't had injuries occur, but maybe there's concerns, things that are being reported that are leading us to believe they need some type of additional solution. So we try and do all of that, and then we're set up in a way to where we inject funding directly into those solutions. So we'll go and actually procure technology. We'll remove that barrier from the business, and when we procure the technology, we do a number of other things as part of our acceleration process. We go through the data privacy reviews. We put the necessary policies in place. We want to get the businesses, the technology in the right way as quick as we can just to focus on the use case. So if we can do all that, then the fun part really starts where we get the technology out in the field and we go through these very quick loops. Sometimes the pilot loop will take less than a week. Sometimes it may take up to a month. But what we're trying to validate is value add when the technology is in place versus when it's not in place. And then what does that mean at scale? So sometimes we'll go through the loop, we'll spit out into the green, or we'll have to go through the loop multiple times before we really feel comfortable with the business value story and the ROI behind that initiative to move it forward. So if we can get there, we create a technology handoff package. We're still working on this. We've done it a few times already, but I think pieces that can be pulled together in terms of how can the business quantify the ROI are really important when you talk about deploying at scale, thousands of devices across the globe. So those are things we're working on, trying to improve that guide, but we want to kind of serve it all up so that a financial decision and deployment decision can be made, and that the businesses then don't have to individually go off and pilot that technology and do all of that work on their own. So we're trying to spread that knowledge out across the business. So that's great. High-level strategy. Here's how we do it. And then the next 2 slides really focus on what we're learning and what we call our connected worker principles. So I'll let this kind of scan this slide. I'm going to take a water break for a sec, and then I'll call out some, I think, really interesting features and requests that we're getting. So you'll notice that there are duplicates throughout the slide. We'll talk about that in a sec. But as we've deployed thousands of wearable devices across the globe, we started to get feedback from mainly three stakeholders. One, the worker or the wearer. The second kind of layer were the folks that were responsible for deployment at a site, responsible for safety and productivity at the site. And then the next layer, I guess down on this slide or up, is the business goals and their perspective. And what do they find valuable, right? So we'll start with the worker and call a few things out. I think one, it sounds easy to say, but comfort UI. If it's not comfortable, if it's not an all-day, entire shift solution, it becomes harder and harder to gain end user adoption, right? So we kind of talk about it. If you wouldn't wear it yourself, don't expect others to wear it. And I think that's a pretty easy one to follow. Reporting and detecting hazards, the ability for, and this is within the context of all of those 6 technologies that we were looking at in the roadmap, right? So there's certain things that smart eyewear is providing versus ergo sensing devices. But the ability to report and detect hazards. So the way we work as a function today is it's after the fact. We had an event, what can we learn from it? How can we improve our training? How can we improve our processes? And this approach with wearables, I think, gets us from a less of a reactive and more of a proactive function, or at least balances that out the way it should be, I think. But reporting and detecting hazards, right? So when a worker is near high voltage and they don't know it, a solution that can alert them of that hazard is kind of across the board feature request or value add that we're seeing. Could say the same thing about ergonomic sensing devices or toxic gas detection wearables. That is definitely a leading feature that we're seeing across the board. I think the other one from the site perspective, and it's on here a couple times, is this concept of a safety index trending, right? So as a worker, if you've got a biometric device on, you may not want your site supervisor to see what your heart rate was 20 minutes ago, but that site supervisor can get value out of knowing if you're at high risk, medium, or low risk without needing to really see your specific biometric signatures. So that's something as we kind of look at other solutions that we see bubble to the top in terms of that value. Okay, I've got 2 more slides. Can I go another minute? Okay. The business perspective, the ROI calculator, if a solution can really prove that it's reducing injuries, cutting out or reducing workers' comp costs, things like that, that typically is an easier discussion when you get to that technology handoff stage. So that's something we've seen some vendors do it out in industry, actually provide an ROI calculation tool within the solution itself. It relies on you to plug in some information, but can be very powerful if you do have that info available. And I think, predictive analytics, right? So if we can layer in weather information, disparate data, and start to overlap some of that information and understand when things are likely to occur, I think that's another maybe future feature that will provide some value. So I'll just hit on 1 or 2 of these quick. I think a living strategy for us is really important. We didn't want to stay fixed into a process. We wanted to create kind of a living trial by fire process, which I talked about earlier. I underestimate the simplest solutions. I think something that tripped us up initially is we assumed complexity meant more value, and sometimes it's exactly the opposite. So we kind of look for some of those things when we're doing our technology down selection. And I already mentioned don't deploy what you wouldn't use, and don't take connectivity for granted. So I think that's some excitement around Edge OS and what's going on here at the GRC. This is our footprint today. I won't go into too much detail here, but really it goes from strategy over to execution on the right, and then what value we're measuring in the middle. So today we've got 2,200 devices going through almost 80 global pilot programs. We're supporting or have supported about 200 teams through that evaluation pilot to deployment process, and we're doing it with other organizations as well. So folks like Boeing, Dow Chemicals, setting up some benchmarking partners to share what we can, but also learn from them, so we can leverage their knowledge. So far so good, but I think we've got a long ways to go. And I'll leave you with this. So this is from a German futurist. His name is Gerd Leonhard. Does anyone know him, or has anyone heard of him? Okay. Yeah, so he has some very kind of thought-provoking questions. Are we becoming more like machines? Are machines becoming more like us? There's some very, very smart people that say over the next 20 years, we're going to advance as a civilization faster than we did in the past 300 in the realm of technology. So I really think within this context of what we're talking about today, these new wearable devices, they're going to be the norm. Folks already put on arc flash-rated gear, safety gloves, hard hats to protect themselves. And I think here in the very near future, voltage sensing devices, gas sensing devices, exoskeletons will just be the norm, but we'll see. So that's it for me. Sorry for going over, but appreciate the time and looking forward to the Q&A in a bit.